Today, we're going to talk about sentences that use the verb 있다. A bit more technically, existential constructions and possessive constructions. Existential constructions in English are formed with there, followed by a form of the verb be, the entity that exists, and a location. There's an apple on the table. There's an apple on a table. In Korean, typical existential constructions consist of three basic elements: a location, a subject with its case marker, and a verb. 탁자에 사과가 있어요. The location 탁자에 may be omitted when it's contextually clear. While English obligatorily marks an entity's definiteness with articles like a or the, a bare noun in Korean like 탁자 is interpreted as specific or indefinite, depending entirely on the context. Thus, 탁자에 사과가 있어요 can be translated as either there's an apple on the table or there's an apple on the table. Meanwhile, from a linguistic perspective, the core function of existential construction is to introduce brand new information into the conversation. In other words, an existential statement consists almost entirely of new information. We rarely say there's a boy in front of us out of the blue in the middle of a casual chat. We use existential sentences to bring fresh concepts into a conversation. For example, imagine a mom telling a bedtime story to her little boy. Once upon a time, there's a very brave man in a town. In Korean, that would be 옛날에 한 마을에 아주 용감한 남자가 있었어. On the other hand, possessive constructions in Korean typically appear with entities that have no particles attached at all. In fact, even the subjects are often left unsaid depending on the context. Check out these examples. 우산 있어? 너 우산 있어? 너 지금 우산 있어? 너 지금 가방에 우산 있어? I already talked about word order back in episode number 1, so I'll skip that part here. The first and second sentences, 우산 있어 and 너 우산 있어, are practically identical in meaning, so you can just choose whichever fits the situation. The third sentence, 너 지금 우산 있어, simply adds the time adverb 지금. The last sentence, however, 너 지금 가방에 우산 있어? Is where it gets interesting. In English, you have to explicitly say in your bag for it to make sense. Like, do you have an umbrella in your bag? But in Korean, if you literally say 너 지금 너의 가방에 우산이 있어? It sounds extremely awkward and unnatural. Because you already said no at the beginning, the bag in this context is naturally understood as your bag, not just a bag, and certainly not my bag. Now, while I'm not entirely sure of the exact reason yet, possessive constructions in Korean almost always show up without any particles, unless it's a very special case. In my master's thesis, I actually wrote that Korean textbooks should explicitly teach students not to attach particles when learning possessive constructions. To be honest though, I didn't push that argument too strongly. I realized that for absolute beginners, having to learn two completely different constructions for the same verb 있다 can be overwhelmingly complicated. Plus, even in possessive constructions, people do occasionally attach particles to a sentence component if they want to emphasize it, just like we discussed in episode number 2 and number 3. If I try to teach possessive constructions strictly, I have to explain the logical consistency of all the case markers students learned before. And I know not many learners enjoy sitting through heavy linguistic lectures. In a language classroom, it's natural to keep explanations as straightforward and bite-sized as possible. So whenever or whomever you learned from, please know that your teacher didn't skip this because they lacked knowledge. Languages don't work by creating a set of rules first and then forcing people to speak accordingly. A language exists first as a massive living chunk of human communication, and only later do humans come along to figure out the patterns. We call this rules, but honestly, there are way too many exceptions for them to truly be called rules. In my opinion, language is a system that is much easier to grasp through the lens of philosophy rather than logic. In the English speaking world, a worldview rooted in exploration, individualism, and development shaped the way grammar was systematized. On the other hand, in Korean, which developed against an agricultural background, there was a fundamental assumption that nature, weather, and natural disasters were invisible forces beyond human control. Because of this, sentences that focus on subjects, actions, or states rather than on objects that I can control are much more dominant. This worldview that humans cannot alter nature at will is directly reflected and represented in Korean sentence structures. In Korean, nouns feel more fluid, changing depending on the context. Because of this, English nouns are heavily grammaticalized into countable versus uncountable categories. A chicken refers to the prototypical representative animal. Chickens refers to multiple countable birds. And chicken as a mass noun refers to the edible meat. This distinction is super important to English speakers, but to someone like me, who is a native Korean, English noun grammar sometimes feel needlessly detailed and surprisingly tricky. In Korean, a noun like 닭, chicken, is determined by the context. For example, if you say 닭이 있다, you don't know the exact count, but you know there is a live animal chicken. If you say 닭이 많다, the verb 많다 already carries all the plural information you need. So there's no need to mark plurality on the noun itself. And while 닭 can naturally mean edible chicken depending on the situation, if you need to be crystal clear, you can just say 닭고기, chicken meat. The language developed so that you don't need to slice and dice every single noun into strict grammatical subcategories. The verb and its verb endings carry most of the information, and whatever it's missing can easily be picked up from the context of the conversation. Guys, just imagine trying to memorize everything I just said as rigid rules in a textbook. What a headache, right? Like, wait, so in a possessive construction, there are no particles, but in an existential construction, you must use them? Huh? But why does this sentence have all the particles when it feels like a possessive construction? Did my teacher miss something? Is my Korean teacher bad at teaching? How frustrating would that be? Isn't the true charm of learning a language about diving into different books, trying things out, making awkward mistakes in conversations, and pushing through those embarrassing moments? So what if your pronunciation is a little off? When I first started learning English, my pronunciation was pretty bad too. But I kept speaking, kept practicing, and even though it felt like I was stuck in the same spot forever, it actually improved over time. You guys might think, wow, Teacher Joy speaks English so well. And yeah, I think I'm good enough. But I still make plenty of grammar mistakes. And honestly, I'm not naturally articulate either. Even in Korean, if I don't have a written script in front of me, I struggle to organize my thoughts on the spot. Back in grad school, whenever I gave presentation, I had to write out full script in Korean beforehand and read it in front of the audience. Even right now, I'm reading from a script I carefully prepared what I wanted to say. I went to graduate school to study Korean linguistics simply because I wanted to understand it on a deeper level, not to gain recognition from others. And as for starting this podcast, it's purely because I hadn't come across a Korean teacher explaining these in detail in English yet. And I had a desire to help you guys in your learning journey. I'm not really the type of person who enjoys putting my face and life out online, nor do I think my English is so mind blowingly good that I can host a podcast effortlessly. Every single time I make a script, I rely heavily on Korean and English dictionaries and translation tools. But even so, this is something I can do with joy and a deep sense of fulfillment, even if I get nothing tangible out of it right now. I'm doing all of this simply because I love it. How about you guys? Are you studying Korean because you genuinely love it too? 우선 저는 부자가 되고 싶었어요. 사실 선생님이나 화가가 되고 싶기도 했는데 아무튼 간에 여러 이유로 항상 부자가 되고 싶었어요. 또 어릴 때 공부는 열심히 했지만 아주 잘하지는 못했고요. 그냥 열심히 학교 다니고 대학교 졸업해서 여러 회사 옮겨 다니면서 일을 좀 했었는데 마지막에 다니던 회사가 거의 폐업 직전이었거든요. 제가 그때 마침 방황을 하던 때라서 2017년쯤에 회사를 그만두고 좀 쉬었어요. 쉬는 동안 좀 생각을 해봤는데 또다시 회사에 들어가기는 싫더라고요. 그래서 당장은 알바라도 해야겠다고 생각을 했죠. 그래서 2018년 여름에 홍대에 있는 아주 작은 한국어 학원에서 일을 시작했었어요. 처음에는 파트타임으로 그냥 내가 단순히 할 수 있는 일이어서 시작을 했었는데 하다 보니까 1년, 2년, 3년, 4년 계속 하다 보니까 지금도 이 일을 하고 있고요. 이 일을 한지 한두 해쯤 됐나? 유학생을 한 분 가르치게 됐는데 그땐 AI가 이렇게 상용화가 안 됐을 때예요. 그 학생이 자기 석사 논문을 좀 교정해 달라고 부탁을 하는 거예요. 그래서 저는 처음에는 '내가 무슨 논문을 보냐.' 이렇게 거절을 했다가 결국은 승낙을 했어요. 그러면서 학술 논문이라는 걸 처음 접했는데 제 기준에서는 너무 재밌었어요. 그래서 그 이후로 그 학생 도서관 아이디를 빌려서 궁금한 게 있으면 논문 찾아서 읽고 혼자 생각하고 정리하고 이게 취미였어요. 근데 어느 날 도서관 로그인이 안 되는 거예요. 그 학생한테 물어보니까 이제 졸업한 지 시간이 좀 많이 돼서 안 될 거라는 거예요. 그래서 그때부터 진짜 심각하게 '아 대학원 갈까 말까.' 이렇게 고민을 좀 하고 있었죠. 또 근데 되게 신기한 게 그 무렵에 주변에서 한국어를 계속 가르칠 거면 대학원에 가는 게 좋겠다고 또 분위기가 그렇게 흘러가는 바람에 대학원에 가게 됐고 이렇게 지금도 계속 가르치고 있습니다. 저는 이 일을 좋아하는 것 같아요.